Good evening and welcome to Pressing Issues for Sunday, June 14th, 2020. I'm Jason Diffendahl, your host, and I'd like to welcome my illustrious panel tonight. We have David Smith.
Hey everyone, good to be here.
Hi. I didn't hear Jason say my name, so I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say anything or not.
Yep, I don't know why she can't hear me. And then we have Rob Whiteside.
Hey guys, what's up?
Welcome to the show, Rob.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
So this week we have a bit of news, not very much actually, simply because there hasn't been a whole lot different going on. Universal Studios Florida is still open. Disney Springs is still open. A couple other extra additional properties in Disney Springs have opened. The only piece of Disney news that I remember being very significant is that Topolino's at the Riviera will be the only resort offering character dining when Walt Disney World reopens. And I'm not entirely sure. So the DVC resorts reopen a week from tomorrow, June 22nd. And I'm not entirely sure if Topolino's is going to open on June 22nd for character dining or if it's afterwards. But never fear. Tom and I will both be on site at the Polynesian villas at the Polynesian on Monday, June 22nd to bring you all of the details. And then we'll be at Bay Lake Tower on June 23rd as well. So tune in next week for all the exciting news of DVC resorts without anything to do because the parks are still closed. So I think that's as much of the news as really there's going on. And so what I wanted to do this week is the long-promised DVC episode that we've wanted to talk about for a while now, ever since the Disney Vacation Club changed a lot of their rules because of the shutdown. There's a lot of nuances to these rules, a lot of issues, and so I thought we would talk about that, and I wanted to make sure that I had a panel on that night that consists of all DVC members. So we've got David and Marcy, who are DVC members, and also Rob is a DVC member, and I'm a DVC member as well. I know Axel's a DVC member, but since he lives in Florida, I figured, and we heard from him the past couple of weeks dealing with Universal, I figured we'll give Axel a break this week. And so here we are. The biggest, actually, piece of DVC news just came out today is the rumored cancellation, or at least significant postponement of Lakeside Lodge. That is a DVC resort that is being built on the former site of River Country, or at least near the former site of River Country. And some aerial photos that showed up today make it look like they're planting grass where the hotel should be built. And so that project may be canceled. It may be indefinitely postponed, much like Pop Century Legendary Years was in the wake of 9/11. But realistically, I think the one of the issues with Reflections is kind of an issue that's been plaguing DVC for a little while now. And that is a significant amount of unsold inventory. And so essentially, since Aulani opened, Aulani has been a rather difficult resort to sell, not because it's not in a highly desirable location, but because people that buy Disney Vacation Club generally like to come to Disney World. And last time I checked, there's no Disney World parks in Hawaii. So, between Aulani and then Riviera, so Riviera is suffering from a different problem, but there's still significant unsold inventory at Riviera. The problem with Riviera is that the point charts are extremely high for a resort that doesn't have a significant amount of amenities. So the points are higher than, for example, Bay Lake Tower, which you can walk to the Magic Kingdom from. There's also weird room setups at Reflections, and you can look back on wwnt.com when Reflections first opened. We talked about a lot of the room issues. I think there are no one-bedroom rooms at Reflections. There's studios and there's 2 bedrooms. I'm sure somebody in the chat will correct me if I'm wrong. I should be watching the chat. But
the one that shocks me, Jason.
Yep.
The one that shocks me is the fact that they have the rooms with the Murphy bed, which actually doesn't have a legitimate bed in the room. Like their studio has the Murphy bed pull down.
That's the real tiny studios, yes.
Right. That's crazy to me that you would have a DVC, which is supposed to be your home away from home, that doesn't have like a bed sitting in the footprint. Now, I get the idea that you're trying to save space, but it seems like that's not really a DVC. That's like a New York efficiency apartment. I don't even know like what the idea was there, but it seems like if you were going to be treated to the Riviera and this opulence, that you would want an actual bed. I mean, it's cool that it folds down, but like when you walk into a room and you're like long day at the park, it's nice to just sit down on the bed and not have to pull it out of the wall.
I totally agree. I mean, Murphy beds are nice and convenient when they're the 5th bed in a studio. So like at the Polynesian Studios, there's a Murphy bed under the TV that is the 5th bed, 5th adult. That's the perfect use of a Murphy bed. As a primary sleeping area for a hotel room, that's not the use of a Murphy bed. So, yeah, we could talk about that. But, no, I think somebody asked in the chat, are we talking about Riviera? And we were, but we're also talking about Reflections, which possibly we learned today might be canceled or at least indefinitely delayed. Reflections is being built on the shore of Bay Lake, near the former River Country site. And so the other thing that I didn't mention about, well, I was kind of leading into this. So the significant amount of unsold inventory at Riviera, simply because I think nobody wants to buy there. There's not really a compelling argument for buying points at Riviera when you're not within walking distance to any parks, and it has far fewer amenities than some deluxe resorts like the Boardwalk or the Contemporary, and the points, the room point requirements are much higher. So this may be. So in essence, there's a lot of unsold inventory at Riviera because people aren't super interested in buying points at Riviera. That coupled with the pandemic, coupled with economic issues, coupled with a significantly increased number of foreclosures and buybacks for DVC properties because of the COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent closure. There's just a lot of unsold inventory in the DVC system right now. And so the need to finish Reflections and get that open so that they can start selling Reflections is not a significant need at this time. It could certainly be put off at least a couple of years, if not more. And so I think the rumors that Reflections are being canceled or postponed are, they make sense to me. I'm not going to, the rumors may or may not be true, but if they are true, they certainly make sense. And so that's really the biggest news. But I think what we wanted to talk about tonight, and I'm going to turn it over to everybody on the panel. what we wanted to talk about is the issues that are facing DVC as an organization due to the 3-month closure now. It'll be 3 months and a week, I think, or something thereabouts, overall closure. So that's about a quarter of a year's worth of points that are not getting spent. And so for those of you not super familiar with DVC, it's a timeshare. It works differently than most timeshares because it uses points rather than weeks, which I think a lot of the newer timeshares now go by points too. But regardless, whether you go by points or whether you go by weeks, there is a set amount of inventory. There's a set amount of rooms that can be booked for a year. And if you take up all of that inventory and then distribute that out to the members, that's how a timeshare works. So timeshares are designed to be almost 100% occupancy, and it's only when members don't utilize their points or their weeks that occupancy goes below 100%. And so the issue with the 3-month shutdown is that there is now 3 months worth of points, a quarter of a year's worth of points. And so a lot of DVC members get somewhere between 150 and 200 points every year. You might have bought more points, but even if everybody's averages out to be like 150 points a year, that means every DVC member has 37 points extra to use. And the issue is that extra points in the system topple the balance, because now there's more points able to be used than there are accommodations to use them on, because of all of the 3 months worth of rooms that could not be used for point paying. And so because of that, Disney put into place some restrictions on borrowing policies, and that's kind of, I think, one of the biggest complaints that we wanted to talk about tonight. The restrictions on the borrowing policies essentially state that normally you can, DVC members can borrow all of the points from the following year. So if you get 150 points a year and you want to take a trip that costs 300 points, you can use the 150 points from this year, and you can borrow 150 points from next year and use them all at once for a trip that costs 300 points. That's the normal way that DVC has worked since it started. But now they've imposed a restriction where you can't borrow more than half of your points from next year. So if you had a trip planned that required 300 points, you would not be able to take that trip because you can only borrow 75 from next year, which means your maximum usage for this year is now 225 instead of 300. So that's a significant restriction on some people's plans, simply because I know there's a fair amount of DVC members that don't go to Disney World every year. They usually go every year or every third year. And so what one of the great selling points of DVC is that in addition to borrowing points from next year, if you don't go in a given year, you can bank your points and push them into the next year. And so what that means is that for any given set of any given date, you could have banked points from last year, you could have the points from your present year, and you could borrow points from next year. And so if you had 150 points and wanted to take a blockbuster vacation that required 450 points, you could do that. You could use last year's points that you didn't use last year. You could use this year's points, and you could borrow next year's points. And that's how the system works. And as long as the banking and borrowing sort of evens out across all of the members, it will keep the points in balance over the entire system. But now, because like I said, there's 3 months worth of points that are floating around with no place to spend them, Disney has restricted the borrowing policy to try to even things out and make sure that members who need to make reservations can make reservations because they have points to spend. So at this point, Marcy, I know that you were one of the people that had a serious issue with this new policy because it impacts some of your upcoming plans. And so why don't you go ahead
Yes.
and take the floor?
Yeah, so we are actually in that very situation. My family had planned like a large it we had done back in 2001, we had done a really large family trip. So this would be like 20 years later that we were going to do another one. So same family going and everything. So it was, our plan is to go next November, November 2021. And so I wanted to stay in a 2-bedroom at Bay Lake Tower for 10 days. And we would have enough points if we used all of the points from 2020 and borrowed. We wouldn't need all of our points from 2021, but we would have to actually, since we're going in 2021, it would actually be using all of 2021's points, borrowing from 2022. So we would need to borrow more than half though. So the problem is now is that I'm either going to have to try and rent someone else's points or see if someone will do like a transfer or something like that, which is just a pain in the neck because we have the points and under contract, we should be able to do that. Now I understand, we're in a pandemic and everything. So I think to me, it seems like it would be better for Disney to just say, this was a situation that we could not control. Anybody with points that you weren't able to use during that time that expired or anything like that, I would just, as Disney, like buy back those points so that they did not affect, like going forward, it wouldn't affect all the other members and have to change the contract basically. Because I mean, there's really nothing they could have done about this. This is something that affected everybody. And at what point does Disney's responsibility end to this? Because it's like, how much do people expect Disney to do? They can't, at some point, they're not going to be able to cover everything that people are losing.
Right.
So
and so that's really the
Yeah.
crux. That's the crux of the issue is that even if they restrict you from borrowing, at some point, somewhere down the line, something's going to have to shake out with all these extra points floating around the system. Because you can't keep doing this indefinitely. There's still 3 months worth of extra in the system with nothing to do with them. And I know that
people are probably not going to be traveling either for a while. So that's points,
people aren't going to be
points
traveling.
that aren't going to be using.
Yep. So people aren't going to be traveling. I know a lot of members would exchange points for cruises, which is one of the ways that points leave the system. But people obviously aren't going to be cruising much. It's probably less safe to cruise than it is to go to Disney World. So there's certainly going to be a significant number, fewer people exchanging their points for cruises. And so at some point, somewhere,
for actual, for staying at regular Disney resorts. Then I know that you can do that, but it's a lot more expensive. They should then do it so that anybody who had booked DVC rooms during this time could stay in a regular resort and still use their points.
I think there's a couple of different possibilities for what Disney could do, and we could talk about them. That certainly is one. Certainly reducing the number of points to exchange into anything. So DVC members can exchange points into cruises on the Disney Cruise Line. They can exchange points to use for regular hotel rooms at Disney resorts. They can exchange points to use basically in any timeshare around the world that's part of the RCI collection, which is, there's two main timeshare groups. So about half the timeshares in the world belong to the RCI collection, and Disney Vacation Club members can exchange points for a week at a resort, an RCI resort somewhere. And it's certainly possible for Disney to temporarily reduce the cost in the point cost of any of these exchanges in order to make more people willing to trade in their points for something that basically gets the points out of the DVC system, because that's essentially what they need to do. They have a bunch of points, and unless they expire because people don't use them, there's going to be an overload of points in the system, and they need a way to get them out. So, as you said, Marcy, reducing the point cost of exchanges, either for cruises or hotel rooms or other timeshares, that's one option. I mean, the thing is, and I know a lot of DVC members are like super happy to exchange their points for cruises, but honestly, it's a terrible, terrible deal for DVC members. Most value you can get out of a DVC point is to spend it at a DVC resort. Any exchange you do, whether it's for a cruise, whether it's for a hotel room, whether it's for another timeshare, anything that you do with a point that's not spending it on a night at a DVC resort is a terrible deal for you. And so, but in reality, that's the only way that Disney can get points out of the system in order to bring things back into balance. And so one is reducing the point requirements for any of these exchanges. One option is, like you said, just buying back points, right? Like, put it out there. Anybody that wants to sell back, up to half of their points from the 20, or even 100% of their points from the 2020 use year, Disney will buy them back for X dollars a point. Now, what the X is something else that we might have to discuss. On a lot of point rental places, the going rate is somewhere between like $14 and $18 a point. So if you had 100 points, Disney could pay you $1,500, for example, to buy back those points, and then you would not use them, obviously, but they would be taken out of circulation.
Well, how much does Disney charge because you can also buy up to, what is it, like 15 points or something from Disney?
Yeah, if you need
say
like just a handful.
Yeah, they should.
I'm not entirely sure what the price is. Yeah, I mean, it may be like $20 or something like that they charge. I'm not 100% sure because I've never had to do that. But it's probably somewhere around $20. But honestly, I think in this sort of situation that we're all in, I bet there'd be a fair number of DVC members who would take up Disney on a $15 a point transaction, just to pocket $1,500 for 100 points that they're not going to use anyway because they're not planning on traveling this year or maybe not even next year. So it's a way to get points out of the system. Members will be happy because it puts money in their pocket that they otherwise wouldn't really be able to use. It puts money in their pocket for a vacation that they weren't planning to use, for points they weren't planning to use anyway. And then there's other possibilities too. I think, encouraging members to, like, letting you bank points more than a year, saying, if you want to bank your 2020 points that you couldn't use because of the pandemic and your trip was canceled, normally you can book them 1 year. You can bank them 1 year, and you'd have to use them to book a reservation next year if you bank them from this year. Disney could open up that and say you could bank them 2 years ahead instead of just 1 year. That is another incentive that they could use to make people. I mean, that really just pushes the problem further in the future. But I think until things balance out and people start exchanging points for cruises and things, pushing them off it just pushes the problem into the future. But it may be easier to deal with the problem in the future than it is right now. I think part of the problem with Disney, paying people to buy their points, is that Disney doesn't have any money to do that. So until they start, maybe selling more inventory and get some more cash in, they're not going to be able to do that. But encouraging people to bank points into 2 years from now is certainly something they could do, and it wouldn't cost them any money. The big question in my mind: DVC Resorts open next Monday. Again, the DVC system, as with all timeshares, is built on something near 100% occupancy. The question in my mind is, what exactly are they expecting the occupancy to be at DVC Resorts for the 3 weeks between when DVC Resorts open and the theme parks start to open? I'm going for 2 nights just to see what's happening as a, sort of reason for WDW&T to show to people how things are working at the DVC resorts when they reopen. But if I wasn't doing it for that reason, I wouldn't be going. So how many people are actually going to go in the 3 weeks between next Monday and when the parks open? And if hardly anybody goes, that means that there's really more like 4 months worth of points inventory now in circulation in excess rather than just 3 months. And so again, this is an issue. You could guess that Disney's hoping that a lot of people are going to come in this 3 week span, but the point to Disney World is to go to the parks, and if the parks are closed, what are you going to do? I know there's actually a fair amount of DVC members that come to the DVC resorts and don't go to the parks, or at least don't go to the parks every day of their trip. The question is, would they book a trip? Right. Would they book a trip?
Yeah.
Would they book a trip to just go to the hotel and not be able to go to a park? I don't know.
I have a thought.
So, yep, Rob, go ahead.
So as far as that goes, I think part of it is a lot of people just want to get out of their houses right now. And with schools ending, even though a lot of them have been virtual schools, people want to get away. And I think a lot of people feel safe going to Disney. So I do think that the reason they open them up early is to try to start burning through points, because they know that's going to be a problem. But I think a lot of people just want to get away. And if you've already got these points available, because you don't actually have to pay anything out of pocket, then it may not be a bad idea to go there. And especially now that Universal is open and SeaWorld is open and Disney Springs is open, there are things that you can do while you're there. Now, obviously, you wouldn't be spending all that money with Disney, but I do think that, it definitely is something that occurred to me, that it's like, hey, I know it's going to be a couple weeks until Disney parks open, but I started looking at beach places and they're kind of expensive, and I've already got these points and maybe I won't be able to use them all this year. So for me, it kind of makes a little bit of sense to go there even when the parks aren't open, because on top of that, they're opening up some of the amenities like some of the pools and like some of the restaurants. And so it'll be interesting to see. And when you and Tom go, you can report on it, but it'll be interesting to see what the vibe is when you get there, because, to me, I've been so deprived from the Disney experience for too long now. For me, I mean, it's like I feel it in my bones. And so I feel like, it would be okay if I could just go and stay in a Disney hotel, get a little of the Disney experience, even though it's going to be a little muted of an experience, and be able to then maybe take in some of the things that are around that area and just chalk it up as just a getaway from the inside of my house for just a little while.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, there's definitely going to be a different vibe. I feel more like a traditional resort where people hang around the resort, and don't go out as often as they would normally. I do think that the reason Disney's doing this is simply because of all the reasons that we stated at the beginning of the show around that backlog of points that they have. I think they know that they're not going to get 100% capacity. I can't imagine them filling up those resorts at 100%. But their feeling probably is any single point that's used prior to July 11th is better to be used now rather than holding off until the 11th and the 15th when the parks open. So I tend to think that June 22nd was the absolute earliest that they could open those resorts and have everything in place. And they said, let's do it. Even if the parks aren't open, let's get people using those points prior to even the parks opening.
Well, and in a way, David, it's also a little bit of a way for us, the people who are Disney's truest, biggest fans, big enough to invest in this, to basically be the guinea pigs. Like, we're going to be a little bit more forgiving. I mean, not Jason, but some of us will be a little bit more forgiving about these processes as they're getting used to the idea of what does it mean to clean the room thoroughly and bag up the remote control and not have the housekeeping line check-in. And also, we're the most low maintenance of that group too, I think, because we're not going to be coming to the front desk asking stupid questions, or we know that we are, as DV, we're not going to get housekeeping every day anyway, and so we're okay with that. So I think in a lot of ways it is also, we're being used a little bit as a guinea pig as they start to ramp up and to get to where they need to be. So I think multiple reasons for opening, but I think somewhere somebody had to be thinking at least that this would be a good trial run.
Yeah, absolutely agree. It makes sense.
No, it does make perfect sense that in order to get cast members trained on new hotel policies and procedures, use the DVC resorts is a great idea. It makes perfect sense for a lot of reasons, but one is to start to get DVC point inventory out of circulation, and then use it to train cast members. Somebody in the chat asked about postponing or canceling a trip and what happens to their points. I think the current policy is that if you have to cancel a trip, your points, whether if they were banked or borrowed, would go back into the year they came from. There's a lot of restrictions when you cancel trips. If the points are borrowed, they can't go back to where they started from. But a lot of those restrictions have been waived for trips that got canceled. So that's I mean, there are definitely Disney's definitely doing some things for the members whose trips got canceled, like relaxing some of the restrictions on what happens to borrowed points and stuff. So it's not all their policies are bad, but again, this is sort of a situation that was never envisioned. It was never, these sorts of contingency plans weren't ever put into any of the DVC contracts. And so we're sort of in an unprecedented part of the DVC organization, and how things are working at this point. So no one ever foresaw this coming. There could be lawsuits. I mean, I haven't heard anything about lawsuits. I haven't heard anything about lawsuits being filed against DVC for members, for example, that can't use their points or that aren't allowed to borrow, which is part of the contract, like Marcy said. It certainly could happen. It could happen after the resorts open back up, that if people aren't happy with how their points work. But
also, I'm wondering about dues. Our dues, are they going to go up? Are they going to give us a discount on the dues because the resorts were closed for 3 months? I doubt that's going to happen. But then are they going to double them because now they have to do all this extra cleaning?
Well, I mean, DVC resorts really only get housekeeping on the 8th day of your trip. So that means for a typical week's vacation, most people only get housekeeping once over the course of the week. Now, we talked about this a couple weeks ago with enhanced cleaning procedures at the hotels and everything, too. And the hotels are going to a policy where your room only gets cleaned every other day. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago when these new procedures came out. So, I think the cleaning on the 4th day of a week is probably got to be a pretty thorough cleaning. It used to be, if you stayed more than 8 days, it was a full cleaning. If you stayed only a week, I believe it was just a stripped down version. But I think
disinfecting the room between guests.
Well, that's between guests, right? So that's not even housekeeping in between during your trip, because that's already pretty much almost non-existent. But yeah, in between guests, they have to disinfect. The question is, is that going to cost extra? Well, I don't know what the procedures are in detail, so I don't know how much it's going to cost. I don't know how much extra time it's going to take. It certainly may be the case that they need to hire some more people to do those thorough cleanings. But if occupancy is not at 100%, then they don't necessarily need to rush that job if the room is going to sit vacant for another day anyway. And so,
yeah, I don't know
Yeah,
if
Terry,
cleaning less is a good idea, though. I mean, if you think about how much.
No, I'm not talking about cleaning less. I'm just saying if the room's not turning over right away, they don't need to. They don't necessarily need to clean it that day. They could always clean it the next day. So they could.
No,
they
they
don't
can.
necessarily have to hire more housekeeping.
But what I was getting at was that now that they're only cleaning once a week or once every other day, I don't know how that is going to help things when you think about how much cleaning is done on the cruise line, and then how many cases they ended up having on the Wonder. Those rooms are cleaned 3 times a day, and surfaces are wiped down, and guests are hand wipes and everything before they go into any type of restaurant. I don't know how cleaning less is gonna help the situation.
Well,
So-
I guess, go ahead, David.
I was going to say, going back to the annual maintenance fees, Terry Schultz actually did address that in her April 24th update to DVC members. And although there weren't a lot of specifics there, it did specifically say that they are anticipating lower operating costs because of the closure. There is going to be a refund sent to DVC members around, I'm trying to find it here, mid-December. Now, what it didn't specify, it actually left pretty wide open, is annual fees for follow-on years, for future years. If those cleaning costs that you're talking about do extend the costs of operating the resort, that is going to be passed on to members, and it would not surprise me at all to see maintenance fees go up, more so than they have year over year.
That actually reminds me of like something that I was thinking, and I even hesitate to put this out into the world, but when you're talking about how are you going to absorb all of these points, thing they could do is raise how many points a night in a room costs. And that way that would eat more points and not cost them anything except for making all of us very angry. I mean, they raise points each year anyway on how many points it costs to get into a room, or, change them for the season. And I think that, that point chart is one of the things that keeps us all confused to see, that we're still happy with it because it's points. It's kind of like when they charge, when they have pin prices in the stores and their pin prices are blue, green, yellow, whatever. It's because if you smacked, $14.95 on it today and you want to raise it up to $15.95 tomorrow, you have all these stickers on it. Now it's just, you just change one sign. Same thing with the points. Every year they go up a little bit. We still have the same amount of points, but we're just trying to figure out where to use them going along. So unfortunately, one of the things they could do to make some of these points get eaten up faster, unless you think that they couldn't do this, I feel like that they definitely could. The points it costs to be in each room. Now, the law of supply and demand, not everybody wants to go right now. So the people who actually are going and using their points are going to be the ones punished. But I mean, it is an option.
I believe that actually is against the policy, though, because even though DVC is allowed or Disney is allowed to raise the amount of points for a certain night, then they have to take those points away from another night somewhere else. Like, they only have a certain amount of points for the entire year, so they have to stay within that amount.
Yep.
Well,
they can change the point distribution, but they can't change the overall total. So, if, for example, a studio at Old Key West, if you would book it for an entire year, maybe it costs 4,000 points. Then that studio has to cost 4,000 points. They can change around how much it costs on any given day, but it still has to total up to 4,000 at the end of the year.
Okay.
And that's actually a factor of Florida timeshare laws, because in the early days of timeshares in the 70s and 80s, people were getting screwed because of unsavory practices, and so Florida put that in their timeshare laws, and that's why Disney has to do it that way. So that's why like, for example, Old Key West rooms are some of the biggest rooms on property, but as far as DVC goes, they're some of the cheapest rooms on property. You can get a studio at Old Key West for like a third of the points of a studio at Grand Floridian, for example. Part of that is because Grand Floridian's a more desirable property, but it's also because they can't increase the price of Old Key West points.
So, Rob, to your point, though, I mean, there is some. They can fool around with the seasons of those points and where they fit. I mean, just this last year, we saw them go from 5 seasons within the point chart for 2020 to 7 seasons within 2021. So, absolutely, I think in 2022, you're going to see them start shifting the dates around so that the higher point numbers are going to be longer in the year, and probably reduce the amount of lower point seasons, or at
yeah,
least
I mean that's really
with...
I think, and I think that's actually a good thing when they do that. Like for most of the 2000s, they didn't do that. Most of the between 2000 and 2010, I don't think they did that ever. But they've started to do it more recently, and I think that's a good thing, because the goal, as I said, the system works because there's a number of points out there that matches the number of room nights available, and so the system has to be balanced in order for it to work. And if there are rooms that are going unsold because people don't come on that day, then you need to adjust the supply and demand to get those rooms booked, basically. And so the more that Disney tweaks the point charts, the more it's likely to balance out supply and demand. It's going to be cheaper for certain people to come at times when rooms would otherwise go empty, and it's going to be more expensive for people to come at times when there's high demand. But it balances things out in the end, and the total number of points in the system stays the same. Because it has to. So what it's doing is it's balancing supply and demand to make the system overall stay in balance.
Well, and you know what? Maybe that could be to your point about Riviera being so many points, is that if they can't adjust them for the resorts that already exist, maybe they are adjusting them for new resorts. Is that something that they can do? Is that why Riviera is higher, do you think?
They can. That's absolutely why Riviera's higher. That's why points, like the point cost for a studio in any resort has always increased every time a new resort opened. At some point, I think you're going to hit a tipping point. Maybe we've hit it actually with Riviera. But also, that's also why the cost per point has gone up. So if you want to go buy points right now at Riviera, is it like 160 or 170, maybe something like that?
List price is 195 before discounts.
Holy smokes.
That's
All right,
crazy.
so if you wanted to go and buy points at Riviera right now, the price is $195 per point. When I bought points at the Beach Club in 2003, the list price was $56 a point.
Oh, Lord.
So, obviously, that's worse inflation than Disney park ticket prices. But that's because once DVC started taking off, they realized they could get a lot more money out of it by charging more. So they charged more, and they had more points to sell because they increased the point prices. So DVC has been a money machine. It's absolutely a money machine. It's term cost for DVC. Once the place is built and paid, the members pay all the maintenance. So DVC is an absolute cash cow for parks and resorts. But at some point, you're gonna hit a resistance point. You're going to hit a point where the value just isn't there. And back in 2003, the value was absolutely there at $50 a point. Even when Bay Lake Tower opened in, when did Bay Lake Tower open?
I think it was 2009 because
2011?
that's when we bought into DVC and Bay Lake
Okay.
Tower was new.
So even when Bay Lake Tower opened in 2009, points were around $100 a point, I think, and that was a good deal. And but at $195 a point, I don't think so. I remember calculating like the total cost of ownership over the course of the contract, and so when I bought at Beach Club, you would spend your points every year, and you would basically get your buy-in price back in about 7 or 8 years. I think at $100 a point at Bay Lake Tower, we calculated it out to be like 10 or 11 years, but still, it's a 40-year contract, so you were still looking good. I think at $195 a point, I haven't done the calculation, but at $195 a point, you've got to be looking at a long, long time to get that return on your investment, more than 20 years. And if you factor in time cost of money, it's probably even longer than that. So at some point, for a 40-year contract, the return on your investment is zero. And I think maybe, like I said, I haven't done the math, but I think at some point, I think we're getting pretty close to that. Especially when Riviera the point prices for a room at Riviera are getting to be pretty extreme. You look at, for example, the Polynesian bungalows. If you wanted to book a week in the Polynesian bungalows, it's like 800 or 900 points. And even at the $15 a point, which is sort of the low end of the going rate, at $15 a point, a week in the Polynesian bungalows is $14,000. That means those rooms are $2,000 a night for the bungalow, and I think that's just ridiculous. A lot of people bought into DVC. I bought into DVC because it was a good value for the number of points. A room at Old Key West or Saratoga Springs or Beach Club was like, Old Key West, the lowest was 8 points a night for a room. Beach Club and Boardwalk are like 12 or something. And so even at the going rate of $15 a point, you're looking at under $200 for a deluxe resort room at Disney. And now the rack rates on those is $400 and some dollars. But $2,000 cash for a Polynesian bungalow per night is ridiculous. I don't know any room on property that I would be willing to pay $2,000 a night for.
Hey Jason, you said earlier that you felt like that Aulani had flooded the DVC with points because people bought Aulani, but they weren't going to use them at Aulani because they want to use them at Disney
Right.
World. Do you think that the bungalows, because of the high value price of those bungalows and the fact
Absolutely.
that anybody who bought the bungalow is never going to use those points there, did that also contribute to flooding of points, you think?
And so, yeah, it's the same idea, basically, is that if rooms go unbooked for a night, then those points are surplus in the system. And so just like we're dealing with a 3 or 4 month surplus of points, every night that a DVC member is not staying in one of those bungalows is a night that those points are being used somewhere else and are surplus in the system. And so I think when people don't go to Aulani, there's a surplus of points. When people don't stay in the bungalows, there's a surplus of points. And you didn't buy the bungalow specifically. You bought the Polynesian because there are some rooms at the Polynesian in a couple of the longhouses, but the bungalows were in the mix. So you didn't buy specifically at the bungalows. You bought at the Polynesian, but still, the same concept applies, is that for every night that a member doesn't book those rooms with points, those are surplus points in the system that are floating around and that screws up the supply and demand balance. And so, yeah, just like Aulani, you know, if members aren't going to Aulani, then it's screwing up the when you know, people aren't booking the bungalows, it's screwing up the supply and demand balance. When people don't book the grand villas at the Bay Lake Tower, which are amazing but a heck of a lot of points, it screws up the supply and demand balance. And so that's why Disney has and always has put the exchange of points for things like cruises, because they have to be able to keep everything in balance. And so this closure is really just an extreme example of that, where instead of having, you know, X number of points in surplus, it's like, you know, way more than that. It's like 100 times as bad as somebody not booking the bungalows or whatever. But yeah, I think Riviera is a big problem, because Riviera points are so expensive. I'd like to stay at Riviera. I'd like to go there. I'd like to, you know, stay a couple nights there, but it's so expensive.
Yeah.
I can't justify booking there. Like, I'm looking at a trip right now in the middle of August this summer. Right now I'm booked at Kidani Village, and it's like 270 some points, I think, for the 6 nights. I would absolutely stay at Riviera just to try it out, but it's like 400 points for that same time period for the same size room. And so I could book at Kidani Village and wake up and look out my window and see animals. Or I could book at Riviera and wake up and look out my window and see the Skyliner.
So what do you think happened, Jason? Like, do you think that Disney just got so full of themselves with
hubris,
how successful, you know, DVC has been, or do you think that they just overestimated how popular the Skyliner would be?
I think it's probably more the former. I mean, I think the Skyliner is pretty popular, and it's pretty easy to get from Riviera to Epcot. So that's a big selling point. But the part of the problem is that you can stay at Beach Club, Boardwalk with DVC points and walk to Epcot. So the ability to take the Skyliner to Epcot is more of a hassle than walking to Epcot from the Boardwalk or the Beach Club, and it costs more points to stay at Riviera. So I think they probably, I mean, maybe they overestimated the allure of the Skyliner. I think it's just they haven't going where they figured out what they can and can't get away with. They haven't hit the tipping point. And so they just keep going until they finally will hit it. And Riviera may absolutely be the tipping point.
And I think, yeah, part of the problem is the perception, rightly or wrongly, is that Riviera is a moderate DVC resort. It's the equivalent of a moderate, yet they are charging deluxe rates in terms of points.
They're charging more than deluxe,
right,
in a lot of cases. Yeah, and it's a big resort. I mean, it's surprisingly big. I was not quite prepared for how big it was when I actually went there. I thought it was going to be a sort of smallish resort. No, it's really big. And that means they have a lot of rooms that cost a lot of points, and that means they have a lot of points to sell to new members, but it also means that they have a lot of new members buying these points and then trying to use them at the cheaper resorts. And so it's been a problem for the last probably 5 or 6 years now, maybe a little more than that, where I've really noticed that booking any trip is pretty difficult unless you do it like 11 months in advance. And it just so happened that over that same period, you know, I used to be able to book trips 11 months in advance, but over the last 5 or 6 years, I've traveled differently and haven't really booked trips 11 months in advance. And it's really hard to get a room. I mean, it's hard to get any room on Disney property, and that's mostly attributable to Aulani, I think. But it's also really hard to get a lot of the rooms at places like Beach Club and Boardwalk because they're relatively inexpensive, and so highly desirable from people that bought at, like, Grand Floridian, where the room costs are much higher. If you bought at Grand Floridian and you like Epcot more than Magic Kingdom, why wouldn't you spend your points at Boardwalk and Beach Club instead of Grand Floridian? Because you get the same room for a lot less points, and you'd be closer to Epcot than taking the monorail. So, I mean, I think over time, the supply and demand balance, the point values have gotten really out of whack, and that's created a situation where it's hard to book at Disney World. And I will admit, when I bought my first set of DVC points in 2001, I bought them at Vero Beach, because they had a promotion where Vero Beach points were $15 off. Now remember, points were only like $50 at that point, so $15 off was a lot. And I bought my first contract of points at Vero Beach. I've never visited Vero Beach. I had never visited Vero Beach when I bought those points. I have never visited Vero Beach in the 20 years since I bought those points. So I will 100% admit that I own points somewhere and have never used them at that resort. I've used them at Walt Disney World almost exclusively. And so that's the same problem as Aulani. It's the same problem as Hilton Head. Vero Beach, actually, Disney owned a heck of a lot of property at Vero Beach, and there were 3 phases of that resort that were designed and ready to go. They built one phase and had such a hard time selling the points that they canceled the other 2 phases, because they realized that people that buy DVC want to go to the parks, and some of them may want to go to the beach, but not enough to balance out the number of people that want to go to the parks. And so they realized at that point they need to build more resorts at the parks and less elsewhere. They also had plans to build a DVC resort in Manhattan that got canceled. They had plans to build a DVC resort at National Harbor near Washington, D.C. that got canceled because DVC members buy into DVC 99% of the time to use their points at Walt Disney World. And
Well,
so
isn't that
I
part
think
of the problem with Riviera?
absolutely
though,
is part of the problem.
Because like now with the new contracts, they can't actually use their wait, is it that they can't use their points at existing resorts, or they can't use them at new resorts? I can't remember now.
They can't use them at existing resorts, I believe.
Okay, so
there's a lot of
so you're paying $195 a point, and you can't even stay at any of the resorts that are currently existing. So
right.
I don't know what they were
and
thinking.
That's because the demand is already outstripping the supply. And Aulani is an example where Aulani's a pretty big resort. I've never been there, but it's a pretty big resort. There's a lot of points at Aulani that I think don't get used at Aulani. I kind of think, late 90s that all happened. By the time they built Aulani, I think they figured, well, DVC is big enough that there's probably enough people that want to go to Hawaii that we can build a resort there and it'll get pretty high occupancy. And I think they're right. I would love to go to Aulani. It's just the airfare is pretty expensive, but at some point I can absolutely see myself going to Aulani. No question about it. I will definitely go to Aulani. I'll probably go to Aulani before I'll go to Vero Beach or Hilton Head Island, because it's a more attractive destination for me. I mean, I hear Vero Beach is great. I would go. It's just usually when I'm in Florida, I end up in Orlando. But I mean, there's I think there's definitely been miscalculations in a lot of places. Okay, so somebody in the chat has clarified the restrictions on the Riviera points. If you buy the points at Riviera that are $195, you can absolutely use them at other Disney resorts, any of them. The restriction is if you get Riviera points by resale
Resale. Yeah.
on the secondary market, then you cannot use them anywhere but Riviera and resorts built after Riviera. So the restrictions at Riviera. We haven't talked at all about the resale market, and this is like a whole nother hour-long discussion. But because timeshare is a deeded interest in a real estate, you can sell it on the secondary market. Disney's not the only one that can sell you DVC points. And so when people want to sell points, when they either stop going to Disney for whatever reason, their kids grew up and went to college or whatever, you hit financial, you lose your job, there's some financial turmoil, COVID, and you need money, your DVC timeshare real estate interest is a valuable thing, and you can sell it. And there are there's not a lot. There's a fair number of real estate brokers that specialize in selling DVC, reselling the contracts. And so there's not a lot of restrictions on resales. In the early years, there were none. So you could buy resale points at a price less than Disney and enjoy all the same benefits as if you bought direct from Disney. I bought the Vero Beach points that were $15. There was a $15 promotion that ended up being cheaper than resale. And then when I bought Beach Club was just opening, and I bought the points from Disney because as a resort first opens, it could take years before those contracts show up on the resale market because people have to buy them from Disney first. And then decide to sell them at some point down the road. So I wanted Beach Club, so I bought Beach Club from Disney. The problem with Riviera is that if you buy them from Disney at $195, and then you need to sell them, no one's going to pay you whatever the resale price is. Different resorts have different resale values because of supply and demand, really. So if you wanted to go buy DVC points on the secondary market, you might pay like $160 for Bay Lake Tower. Maybe you pay $170 for Grand Floridian. Well, the problem is that because the restrictions on Riviera points when purchased at resale and not direct from Disney, points at Riviera on the resale market may only sell for like $130. Because you can't use them anywhere but Riviera. They might go for less than $130, because if you buy Riviera points that you can only use at Riviera, you have to pay the prices of the rooms at Riviera. Whereas if I bought points somewhere else, I could book at Old Key West for 8 points a night instead of Riviera for like 30 or whatever. So somebody asked, will reflections have the same restriction as Riviera on resale? Well, probably, because Riviera's resale restrictions are for Riviera and any other subsequent resorts. But if Reflections is canceled or at least postponed, it's kind of a moot point. But yeah, so the problem is that Riviera, people don't buy Riviera from Disney at $195 because they know the resale value, if they ever needed to sell it, is going to be way lower. And so there are restrictions on resales from at other resorts, but they're not as onerous as Riviera. So for example, if you buy resale points and you don't buy like at least 100 from Disney or something, then you don't get the annual pass discounts or whatever. Are restrictions that were put into place 5 or 6 years ago on resale contracts at other points. But if you bought, like I did, if you bought 100 points from Disney and then you wanted to add on more points later, you could absolutely go to the resale market and you would be saving yourself a lot of money on add-on points and the restrictions wouldn't matter because you already are in the system. So the restrictions would only matter on the Riviera. It wouldn't matter on anything else. But yeah, so $195, the value proposition for Riviera points at $195 is pretty significant. And then when you realize that the resale value is lower, that's like saying, okay, you could buy a Toyota, which keeps its resale value in 80% for 5 years after 5 years, or you could buy a whatever you want to call it, a DeLorean, whose resale value plummets to like 40% after 5 years. If you ever think that you're going to need to sell those points, you ought to buy the one that has the higher resale value after 5 years, because when you go to sell them, you'll get more money. And so it's the restriction on the resales has really hurt the sales of Riviera points, so much so that other than being in a pandemic, the points were really selling slowly to begin with. But yeah, it was assumed that Reflections would have the same restrictions, although Reflections and Riviera is they would be like brother and sister, because you could use points at the other one, just couldn't use them at any of the older resorts. Just want to mention in the chat, people are talking about Reflections, and we're talking about construction continuing. We talked right at the beginning of the show, and there's a story posted on WDWNT.com that it looks like they stopped the building process and planted grass at the Reflections hotel site. And so our guess is that Reflections was one of the capital projects that got cut due to the pandemic. So Disney, somebody said it was announced today. Did Disney actually announce Reflections was canceled? I don't know.
It was still
not aware.
a rumor and unconfirmed last I saw.
Yeah, I know we posted a rumor. I didn't think it was announced by Disney, especially not on a
seen
Sunday. I wouldn't think it would happen. But anyways,
it's more like a Friday news story.
They did. Somebody said they removed all mention of it from their website, which they removed mention of a lot of things, but today they removed mention of it from their website, so that's very likely possible too. But anyway, I think it's a good time to take a break. We will come back and chat some more about anything else DVC that you guys want to talk about. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
4 panelists, 30 minutes, 1 week in Disney Parks news. This is Parks Center. On Parks Center, the panel and I cover the top 7... 7? Yeah, 7 Disney Parks stories of the past week. From attraction news to transportation scandals to new food and merchandise, we'll cover it all in 30 minutes or less. You can watch us stream live every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. at wdwntunes.com, watch episodes on demand at youtube.com/wdwnt, or subscribe to the audio version of the show on your favorite podcast app.
Dreamfinders is WDW News Today's podcast all about the creative culture surrounding Disney parks. Authors, Imagineers, dancers, actors, photographers, filmmakers, and a whole lot more have all stopped by to chat about how Disney has inspired their artistic work.
But I still remember sitting in conference tables and looking across at Michael and Jeffrey Katzenberg and this sort of little 6-year-old inside of me going, what in heaven's name is going on here? This is...
And we're off and running, and Tony needs someone to lay it out for him. And there's no architect available. So the next thing I know, I'm laying out the pavilion.
I got to tell you, I have not enjoyed a podcast so much. It's just a warm conversation, and a warm and intelligent conversation, which you don't find that often in podcasts.
Dreamfinders. Episodes drop every other Tuesday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcatcher.
WDW News Tonight is our weekly comedy show combining the news of the week, comedy segments, thoughtful discussions, insane characters, parody commercials, games, and more. Watch live on Thursdays at 9 p.m. and become a Wigs member to get access to a bonus post show. Watch WDW News Tonight episodes anytime and live on YouTube, or get the audio-only version on iTunes and other podcast services.
Thanks for joining us. We're continuing to our second hour now. This episode dedicated to all things DVC. And I have with us David and Marcy Smith and Rob Whiteside here to talk about DVC. All of them are DVC members. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you guys. I think we went through a lot of the details, and I know we made some people's heads spin with all the calculations and math. And this isn't a math game, but it could certainly be. So what I want to do is kind of open the floor now in our second half to you guys, and to talk about any other DVC experiences, things, complaints, whatever. Maybe if people in the chat have questions. We could certainly keep an eye on the chat and answer questions if they have DVC-related questions. Somebody did say that Disney's a tad greedy and pricing things so high that it will eliminate a huge number of people from going, which is absolutely the case. And we talked about that, I think, maybe on our first episode or our second episode of this show a couple months ago.
I feel like Disney's greed has been a running theme of this show, but
it has, yeah. And I mean, yeah, pretty much. You're right. But anyway, so I'm turning the floor over to you guys to talk about whatever DVC-related stuff you guys want to talk about.
So I have just two quick hits that we touched on earlier, just for the sake of accuracy. So one-time use points are something that are available to members. It's up to 24 points, I think, in a given year. Yeah, each year. Disney prices them at about $6.86 a point. So when you add on taxes, that comes to $19 a point. But that gives you also a sense of how Disney values those points and how much they are expecting, how much revenue they expect from those points. So about $19 a point. The second thing, there was a question about the 50% banking policy that's going into effect. While there may still be lawsuits on this, it is actually written into the timeshare agreement that you sign that they are allowed to go back to, or they can go up to 50% restrictions on banking for future year points. So that's well within their existing agreement, but doesn't mean people aren't going to complain about it and possibly take some legal action.
Thanks for clarifying.
All right,
that,
so
David.
Can I throw out something? So when I first worked at the Disney store back in the day, and I had this button that I wanted to share. It's like it says Disney Vacation Club on it, and it says "Bring the magic of Disney vacation ownership." When they came in to talk to us about it,
their original logo with the three mountains, isn't it?
Yeah. Sorry, I have shaky hands, so you can't really see it.
So that original logo has three mountains, and then they cut it down to two mountains due to budget cuts, and then they cut it down to 0 in the latest version of the logo.
Well, mountains aren't cheap.
No,
so
sure
when I was there, they had like a meeting with us, and they said, okay, so we're doing this new thing. It's called the Disney Vacation Club. And I think I said, so it's like a timeshare? And they said, no, it's not a timeshare. It's vacation ownership. So very early on, they were trying to distinguish themselves separately from a timeshare, but I feel like I was probably maybe a little bit jaded and thought that like, oh, this is a timeshare, because I know that my dad was always, make sure not to buy into a timeshare. Timeshares are not worth the money. So I never really looked into it as an investment, and also didn't have a ton of money to do that. And so we started going more and more as the kids were getting older and older. And so finally, because I have a son and a daughter, we always need 3 sleeping spaces. I think I'm too old to share a bed with one of them. So we always need to have 3 separate sleeping spaces. And that was usually going to be a deluxe hotel. So when Poly opened up, I kind of went through and did the math and said, okay, look, kind of like you were talking about, and played my own little math game and said, all right, how long would it take for this to pay off? And take into account how much the dues are each year and how much the points were going to cost, and based on a 50-year contract. And so it financially, I think, made sense for us, because it's not like we're not going to go to Disney, and certainly we never thought it would be shut down for 3 months. So when we were putting that together, we went ahead and invested. And I talked to some people who were investors, and they were talking about how great it was. One of the things that I immediately had some buyer's remorse about was how hard it is to book a hotel room. I mean, you made a great point earlier, Jason, when you were talking about, the way that you have booked trips recently has been very different. As you're not thinking 7 or 11 months ahead of time. We come up with an event like Reflections of Forever, which you don't know about 7 or 11 months in advance. And so when it happens and you're like, okay, I'm going to book a place, it's really difficult to book a place. Yeah. And especially, again, with the situation I have with, us wanting 3 sleeping spaces. If we want a Saratoga studio apartment, that's only 2 queen beds. That's not enough. We need, it's a queen bed and a queen sleeper. So we don't have that extra sleeping space, which I think is just awful, especially thinking that, mostly this is going to be families who are doing this. And so like that extra bed, that Murphy bed that pulls down, seems like it should be an easy thing to add to some of these rooms. But so it's really challenging to get the rooms that we want. And often, I mean, there have been times where I look and I go, I can't do anything DVC. I'm gonna have to pay out of pocket, because we talked about before, you have to pay to use your points or move them. If you're using the Disney World at a regular hotel, you have that little service fee you have to pay, which is obnoxious, because they waive it in Disneyland, but we know they waive it in Disneyland because they don't have enough DVC rooms. So when I go to do this, it's always been really frustrating that I can't just do a trip whenever I want, that I have to be stocking it early to do that. Since the pandemic and now looking forward, obviously not a lot of people want to go in July and August right now. And it's just like, this is what I had hoped DVC would be when I first bought in, is book a room where you want, when you want. Like it's exciting, right? Because to go on there and see all these rooms available at that's good,
what it used to be in like 2005.
Yeah, and I wish I had been in there. I only joined in 2016, so apparently I picked the absolute worst time to finally join. So I'm in there and I'm looking at the system now going, oh my gosh, this is so great. I feel like I need to book like all my trips right now because I have the ability to do it. But based on what we were talking about earlier about the amount of points that are going to be in the system, I can only imagine that it's going to be, once people get more comfortable with going back, or a vaccine comes out, or people, whatever changes, and people, if it goes back to the original normal, it's going to be a nightmare now, because there's going to be the original problem I have, plus, like you mentioned, the flooding of Aulani and the bungalow points, plus all the people who weren't able to use them who banked them. I can't imagine that I'm going to have an easy time booking a room once that kicks in.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And go ahead, David.
The more I think about it as we go through this show, the more I think that a solution is to do what Marcy said at the beginning and lower those points required for things like cruises and standard resorts and all the other non-DVC things you can use points on. They have a cruise coming up in 2021, and looking at the points required for that, it's if you were to take the cash equivalent of those points and apply it to the cruise, you're paying 3 times as much for that cruise than if you just paid cash out of pocket for it. And you said that, Jason.
Yeah.
And the same goes if you tried to stay in any other resort. If you brought those down to just normal cash equivalents, I think people would hop on them. We would get points out of the system. Availability would start opening up, and it would get back to the balance level that it should be.
I honestly think so. DVC, so you can exchange your points for a cruise on Disney Cruise Line whenever you want, And the cash equivalency is like you're paying triple, somewhere between double and triple the cash price for that cruise. But DVC came up with this idea for these member cruises. And they've had these for years. They've had these since I became a member, I think, in like 2001, where you can only book the cruise with points. And it's a cruise that's only DVC members. They basically charter a cruise ship for a week, and it's only DVC members in all the rooms, and you can only book it with points. And yeah, it's a ridiculous amount of points, can't cash. And there's some huge cachet around this member cruise because it's only DVC members, so they have like all kinds of entertainment and games and things that are catered towards DVC members. But it's a great way to get points out of the system. I think when cruising finally back, it wouldn't surprise me at all to see more of these member cruise things happen, because it's a great way to get a huge number of points out of the system, all at one shot, because there's so many people. Like they have to book, or they have to like have booking windows, and people get different times to call. And crazy stuff. Like it's like booking Cinderella's Royal Table at 180 days. Like the lines are busy, and it's crazy how many people want to book these member cruises. And yeah, they have special stuff on them. But is it worth triple the price? I don't know. But there's still so many members that want to book these things. It's crazy. So I would absolutely think. Well, let me say it this way. Say it. If DVC was smart, they'd have more of these member cruises like towards the end of this year and early next year. Whether that really happens or not, I don't know, because I don't really know if DVC is that smart. But if I was running the show, member cruises are a great way to get huge amount of points out of the system. And people are saying in the chat, oh, they have lots of special things, not yet released information, special guests from animation. People want the freebies on the member cruise, and yeah, that's all true. But if you get the freebies on the cruise, and I save $3,000, I can buy some pretty nice freebies on eBay for $3,000 that you just wasted on a cruise. And I could go on the same exact ship, the next week, and spend $1,000 or something like that. So yeah, you get all this special stuff. They have to make it seem like it's a great value, because otherwise no one would book it. So they absolutely have to give out things that are exclusive to that cruise, because otherwise no one would go. But that doesn't mean it's worth the extreme amount of points that they charge. So let me run these member cruises sell out in minutes.
Yeah, let me run these numbers by you. Let me run these numbers by you. So this is for the June 12th, 2021 member cruise. So this is member rates, right? Inside stateroom, bottom deck, deck 2, 358 points per person, double occupancy, right? So that's 358 times 2. So you're spending 716 points. Now, if you were to rent those points out, even at a very low number of $12 per point, that's $8,500 you could get with those same number of points if you even had that many available. But that inside stateroom, if you were to book it normally, $2,900.
Yeah.
So you're paying basically an extra $6,000
almost
for
triple
those extras. Yeah.
Yep. Almost triple.
Doesn't that feel like the government and their like $10,000 hammers? I mean, it seems ridiculous. Yeah, it seems ridiculous that they would do that, especially to your point, Jason, that you would want to encourage people to use their points on the cruises, that they make it. I mean, I think that was one of the first things that people said to me when I bought in was, you definitely do not want to exchange. You can exchange them for cruises, but you definitely don't want to, because it is a horrible deal. It already has that reputation.
I always thought that as well.
I mean, for $8,000, you could get like a. They are. They're insanely. For $8,000, you could get like a balcony stateroom, like a large family balcony stateroom. So imagine you could book a balcony stateroom for 4 people or you could book an inside stateroom for 2 people for the same price. It just so happens that one of them is on a member cruise and one is not.
Yeah, you're exactly right, because
that's
we
kind of ridiculous.
we actually priced out, before COVID happened, we were pricing out a transatlantic 10-night London to New York, I think. That was $8,500 for the 4 of us. Outside stateroom, full veranda, other than concierge room, that was
the pricing, but yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. So, but yeah, those member cruises are so popular. They could sell out. They could take out enormous amounts of points out of the system in a heartbeat if they wanted to. And being that no one knows when cruising's going to start again, it might be easy for them to get a week on a ship, this year or something like that. And people also go nuts for cruises like in December because it's the Christmas and everything. I bet they could do it. But anyway, go ahead.
The exchange thing too, and I think Jason, you and I talked about this at what was the event? Stage 89. Is that my wife was like, I said we're going to talk about going to Tokyo Disney, and she said, well, let's definitely use our points, because she wanted to try to do it as economically as possible. And you're like, that's the worst idea, because even the exchange for Disneyland, it's like, for Tokyo Disneyland, it's like 50 points for a night in the cheapest room, and you can stay in a nicer. Yeah, you can stay in a nicer hotel right across the street from there at one of the Hiltons or whatever for, 150, $200 a night tops, right? I mean, it's just so.
Absolutely.
So even that, like, it feels like you kind of got got flim-flammed a little bit, into thinking you can use your points for all of these things. But the only place that really seems to make the most sense is to use them at Walt Disney World. But it's tough to get in unless it's right after a pandemic. So.
Yeah, or in the middle of a pandemic and you're booking for later and hoping it's over.
Yes.
But yeah, just to address a couple of things in the chat. Kevin, hi Kevin, asked, could Disney just let people exchange points for stays at other Disney hotels? Yes, absolutely, you can do that. It's still a terrible value. But you absolutely can. So, like, if you wanted to exchange your points for a room at Port Orleans, you could, but it would cost you probably twice the number of points to stay at Port Orleans as it would to stay at Boardwalk. And who wants to stay at Port Orleans when they could stay at Boardwalk, let alone spending twice the amount of points to do it? If you resale, you can't exchange for Disney hotels, which is true in some cases. It depends on when you bought the resale, but that's true. That's one of the restrictions they put into place for resales a couple of years ago. Somebody asked out, is it legal for you to resell your points? Yes, it absolutely is, because it has to do with real estate laws. All timeshares are subject to those same laws. And then the other thing I wanted to talk. Go ahead.
Sorry. Well, the other thing you were talking, because you're talking about resale. Ben and I have this argument on Park Center all the time, because I bought mine straight from Disney and he bought his resale, and he gets upset when they put restrictions on the resale. Whereas I'm not trying to play the 1% here, but it's like, if I'm paying more, I feel like because I bought them originally from Disney, I feel like that I should have some perks to that. So
yeah, for sure. And so that's what I wanted to talk about a little bit, was this whole resale thing, in case people are not that familiar with it. So Disney, because it's a real estate interest, it is totally legal to sell your DVC. And you can sell it through any real estate broker, actually. But what happens is that Disney does this thing where they have the right first refusal on your contract. So if you have a resale contract for your points for, say, $80 a point, that's really low, right? Disney looks at that contract and sees that you're willing to take $80. Well, Disney looks and says, well, heck, I can turn around and sell those points at $195. I'll certainly buy your points at 80, and then turn around and sell them at 195 and just put all that cash in my pocket. And what that means is that the resale market has a price floor that's essentially determined by Disney at any given time. And it's different for different resorts because different resorts have different desirabilities. They sold for different prices at the beginning, different times left on all of their contracts. But in any case, for any given resort, Disney has what they've basically set as a floor for a resale contract. And they won't tell you what it is, but resale brokers know what it is because they see what happens. So if your contract is for $120, and Disney's, internally set floor is 130, and you have a contract. So what happens is you find a buyer, and you sign a contract with the buyer that says the buyer is going to buy your points for $120. Disney gets a chance to look at that contract, and if they like the terms, they could buy it under those exact same terms. So the buyer of your contract gets screwed out of your contract. Disney gets the points instead. And then they turn around and resell them for $195. And so Disney is basically able to set a bottom floor price in the resale market for DVC points. And whether that artificially inflates the resale prices or not, I don't know. Some people say it absolutely does. I think maybe it certainly depends on what the floor is. But Disney knows they can sell points at the list price, and so they will certainly buy them and resell them at list price rather than let you sell them to somebody else. And so what that means is that you can buy resale points because there's a certain price where it's too much of a hassle for Disney to go buy your points. They don't make enough money by reselling at list price to go through the hassle, so they let the contract go through, and maybe that's like at $140 they let them go through or something. I don't know. Resale agents know what these numbers are. But essentially, I could buy, if you're selling your points at $140 and Disney lets that sale go through, I can buy your points at $140. But there are certain perks that you get as a DVC member that bought directly from Disney don't transfer to me. And some of those perks include the $100 discount on annual passes, the
Moonlight
the
Magic
ability to I don't know if Moonlight Magic is one of the perks. Ben knows all these things, so
right,
because he bought his resale. But I know the discounts, the ability to exchange, the ability to I'm trying to think and see what the chat is saying too.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Moonlight Magic and also like the
certain
DVC.
exchanges. But yeah, there's a fair number of restrictions. So what you need to do, I mean, if you go every year, the $100 discount on annual passes for a family of 4 could be like $400 a year. So if you go every year for 10 years, that's $4,000 you're saving by doing that. If that is more than what you're saving by buying resale, then yeah, it makes sense to buy direct from Disney. So there's pros and cons to buying resale. You do lose out on some things. If you bought a contract direct from Disney and then add on by buying a resale, then you still maintain all the perks that you had. There may be some restrictions on how you use those points that you bought at resale, but the discounts and things like that are still in place because you bought some points direct from Disney. And when they put all these restrictions into place, they actually gave out a different membership card to people that bought via resale. So everybody who bought DVC direct from Disney gets a blue membership card. I wish I had mine sitting around. Here it is. Everybody that bought direct from Disney gets a blue membership card like this. if you bought resale, your membership card's not blue. And so when places that give discounts for DVC members, like dining or whatever, yes, that is a fairly old card. But they're all still blue, regardless. The anywhere that takes a DVC card looks for the blue card, and if your card's not blue, they don't give you the DVC discount. So that's how they restrict the discounts based on if you bought it resale or not. And so that's the resale market. I also want to. What's that?
So in terms of restrictions, so I'm looking at the list right now. So if you buy resale after January 19th, 2019, you don't get Concierge Collection, which I forget what that is, Disney Collection, which is other Disney resorts besides DVC. You don't get Adventures by Disney, and you don't get to exchange points at new resorts, so Riviera, whatever comes after Reflections. And you don't get membership
who
extras.
Who would want to do that anyway?
Yeah, exactly. You don't get any extras like ticket and dining discounts or special events unless you've bought at least 100 direct. So if you had 100 direct from Disney and then you resold and got more, you could get those discounts and events.
Yeah,
right.
I think
so
Concierge
like Rob and I
Collection
have
is
100 from Disney.
Yeah, I think
RCI?
Concierge Collection
so if we bought more,
beaches like beach resorts and other resorts. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Concierge Collection is exchanging into hotels that are like high-end resort hotels. They're not time. There are a collection of like high-end resort hotels that you can exchange your points for. I don't know who would do that anyway. It's dumb.
Yeah.
So
this is
bad
like
as exchanging for cruises.
It is. It's like 32
so I don't
points
know why
a night.
people would
do
that.
It's like Millennium Park in Chicago or the Fairmont in San Francisco. So.
Yeah, I've actually
Hotel
looked into it
Coronado.
before, and like when we were going to New York or we were going to the beach, I looked into it before, and then just again, it was one of the. It's like you sold some bad juju. I look at it and went, yeah, it's great that it's there, but I'm not going to use my points for that because again, it only makes sense really for me to use my points when I go to Disneyland or Disney World, and most of the time it's just going to be Disney World. Now I have used them for Disneyland, and I do like that again that they don't charge you that extra fee to exchange them to resort points, and that's only again because they only have a few or a limited amount of DVC rooms in the Grand Californian, and so you can they waive that fee just for California. So, but it's those rooms are expensive anyway out there. So,
yeah, I'm very glad they're building a DVC tower in California. I've stayed in the Grand Californian on points a couple times actually. The rooms are nice, but it's really hard to get because there's so few rooms. And so I'm super happy they're building another resort out there because A, it'll make it easier to get a DVC room at Disneyland. B, it could convince some people who own points at Walt Disney World to go out to Disneyland, which means demand at Walt Disney World will lift a little bit. Depends on how many points they have out there, but it looks like a pretty big tower they're building, so it should be a good amount of.
I was going to ask you about that though, because with Reflections being what we think canceled, do you think that they will also cancel the one in California? Because they just announced that in like May.
I hope not.
So, I hope not too.
That hasn't started yet. I think they won't because I think they know it's gonna be much easier to sell those points, and it's gonna be much more in demand. It's been really hard for the DVC points in California because they didn't have any California resorts. But now that they have Grand Californian, people can see what a DVC resort is. And so I think that's a fairly big market for them that is not tapped to its full potential because they just don't have the rooms there. So my thought is maybe it'll get delayed. My thought is they'll absolutely build that before Reflections because that will sell in a heartbeat. Grand Californian is actually buy, the other thing that people may not know is that if you buy points from Disney at, say, Beach Club Villas is sold out. So no one can go to Disney now and say, hey, I want to buy points at Beach Club Villas. But because of this right of first refusal that we just talked about, Disney has some Beach Club Villa points in stock. They're existing members, and they get sold at a list price that may be different than what they're selling Reflection or what they're selling Riviera for right now. So like I could go and I could add on 25 or 50 points at Beach Club Villas because I'm an existing member and I own there. They do have points at Grand Californian that they can sell. The list price for the points at Grand Californian is way higher than any other DVC resort because the demand is there for those Grand Californian points. Even from people that already own DVC, they want to buy more points at Grand Californian. So we, I booked a trip to Grand Californian, and I had to call it the 7-month window because I don't own there. So I called right at 7 months. I got the rooms, but it was, not assured that we were going to be able to book there. But California's definitely in demand. Absolutely, way more than Disney would have to build a DVC resort like inside Epcot to match the demand of this DVC tower that's going up at the Disneyland Hotel. That's what they would have to do. And Reflections on the shore of Bay Lake is not going to end of demand. Somebody in the chat said, why have we been paying full price on monthly dues when the resorts are closed? And David, you said this earlier in the show that Disney has the partial refund of dues that will be credited to your account in December, I think. So we'll see what that turns out to be. That we don't know exactly what the number is for that refund, but yeah, there certainly must be some value because we didn't pay for all those cast members to clean all those rooms every 4 days for the past 3 months.
So on that sort of related to that, let me ask a hypothetical question of what you think. Because it was closed for 3 or 4 months, however you want to count that time, does that extend the term of the overall contract? Whether it's 40 or 45 years. I don't even remember what ours is, honestly. But
wow,
theoretically, it should extend it by 3 months, right?
Well, I mean, you get the points. See, that's the thing. If you get the points every year, then it may not need to extend the contract because you're still getting the points. You may not have been able to use them for part of that time, but it shouldn't extend the contract because they fulfilled their end of the contract by giving you the points. They just had to restrict when you could use them. And I'm sure there's something in the contract. There's some kind of force majeure construction in the contract that says, like what if a hotel burns to the ground, right? Like you can't use your points there, but you're still probably going to get them. So they're fulfilling their end of the contract by giving you the points. You just may not be able to use them at a specific DVC resort at a specific time. And so my thought is that, no, it's not going to extend the contracts as long as they still give you the points, which I'm pretty certain is they absolutely are still doing that.
That makes sense.
So... let's see.
As far as perks go, one of the other things that sort of bothers me is that it is hard to get into Moonlight Magic. It is like
it's so hard.
Yeah, not obviously again during a pandemic, but as far as like getting in on a regular basis,
it's really hard during a pandemic because you get arrested.
Yeah, exactly. but as far as trying to book it, like I tried to book a few of them, like the Epcot one that happened last year, and it was gone in a heartbeat. And you had all these things that said you could book it early if you already had an existing room, and those went quickly. And then and then it was almost like they were gone instantly. It was trying to get mini main attraction stuff on Disney Shop Disney. I mean, they were just it's so frustrating that is a thing that again is hyped as a benefit to you as a DVC member, but it's not promised.
Yep.
Yeah, it's not promised to you though, because there are a lot of people
Right.
who are going to try to get there first, and probably people who are getting like, all of them before I am. I've only been to one, and it was Typhoon Lagoon, and it was a great event, and it made me happy, to be a DVC member and to take my family there, and like that was a cool thing. It's just really frustrating that you can't get them more often, and how hard that is, and how limited they are. So I wish they'd find some way to do something that's either for everyone, that's almost like a guarantee that you can have it, or something where they do more of them. I mean, that kind of thing. And then the other thing is the DVC Lounge. I love the DVC Lounge at Epcot, but it's always like you kind of hold your breath to see, is this the year when it finally comes to an end? Because they're not promising it to you. It's just one of the things that's there, and it's, just a nice little perk.
Yes.
So some perks are hard to get, some perks are maybe not promised. It kind of is what it is.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of perks, like Moonlight Magic, like the discounts, like the member lounges that are not written into the contract at all. And so the contract says DVC may give you perks, and they may change from time to time. That's basically what the contract says, which means they could shut down the member lounge whenever they want. They could stop doing Moonlight Magic whenever they want. So they do have all these things that they use as a marketing point to buy into DVC. You could get access to the member lounge where you get free drinks in Epcot. They could shut it down tomorrow, and you would have zero recourse, because it's in the contract that you signed that you probably didn't read, that says these things are perks and can be drawn at any time. So
Yeah.
Absolutely. I told this story a couple weeks ago. I think we were talking with Axel about DVC. Way back when I first bought DVC, this must have been 2004. So I was a couple years into DVC. 2004, we're in Disney World in December, and we're walking into Epcot from the Beach Club, and there's all these bushes up in a square thing, basically right where the Skyliner station is now. There's like a private party going on behind these bushes, and it turns out that it was a DVC party. And anybody could get in just by showing their DVC card, and they had cookies and hot chocolate and face painting and characters and balloons. And it might have been advertised. It probably was advertised. I don't necessarily remember reading anything about it. It was probably advertised in like the book that you get at check-in or something, that this member, they called it a Merry Member Mixer. And they had these for early 2000s, and they gave you you got a free pin, you got a Christmas ornament. There were all kinds of these things, and you didn't have to book it, you didn't have to reserve anything ahead of time. You roll up and show your membership card and go in, and there was maybe like 100 people in there. Nowadays it's like the hardest thing to do to get one of these get into one of these member things that's like Moonlight Magic or whatever, that can, they can accommodate several thousand people at the parks and at Typhoon Lagoon, but they're really hard to get into. And the reason is because back in 2004, there was like, 20,000 members, and now there's like 200,000 members. So there's 10 times as many people in the system. There's also, I think, a lot more Florida locals, which means once they advertise these things, can book them and go, and that's why they put into place the restrictions or the priority for people that have room reservations, because they figure that people with room reservations are coming from out of state. They can't get to these things all the time anyway. They only come once a year. And so they open these to people that have room reservations before they open them to actually Florida locals who happen to be DVC members, either because they bought DVC as a local or because they moved to Florida after they own DVC. But in any case, these things are really hard to get into, and I would love for them to have them more often, but it's a cost. It's whether or not you realize it, some of your dues have to go to pay that, because Disney absolutely charges DVC to rent out Typhoon Lagoon for the evening. I remember going to one at Animal Kingdom a couple years ago. This was probably 4 or 5 years ago. Went to one at Animal Kingdom. It was like Party for the Planet or something. It was a DVC thing. And it was hard to get into, but we got into it, and they gave out fast passes for Kilimanjaro safaris at night and things like that. This was like right after they started the nighttime hours for Animal Kingdom, so it was pretty neat. Address a couple other things from the chat. Does anyone know what Disney reservations are down? They stopped taking reservations for most things because they don't really know what's going to happen when they reopen. Obviously, July 11th, the Magic Kingdom is opening. Obviously, there's a fair number of people that had resort stays booked that week that they booked before the pandemic. And Disney has no idea whether those people are actually coming or they're going to decide to cancel their reservation. And so until Disney can figure out how many reservations they actually have, how many rooms they actually have available, they're not taking any more reservations. So, yeah, Disney put out an email to people with reservations that said, please let us know by June 12th if you're planning to come, basically, because they have no idea what to do. Disney has no idea what to do because, of course, it's the summer. You know, they had hotels booked at 100% capacity since December of last year, and now there's all these people that are canceling their trips, and they don't know how many people are going to cancel and how many people are going to come. Obviously, you don't have to cancel until like 7 days in advance or something. So Disney has no idea on July 11th, you know, even though their system shows, you know, 95% occupancy, they have no idea how many of those people are going to cancel between now and July 11th. And so that's why they're not taking any new reservations at the moment. Plus, they have no idea how many people that are actually staying at their resorts are going to be able to actually get into the parks because they have this park reservation system. They have to accommodate annual pass holders who are locals. No one's going to book a hotel at Disney and then have to play this lottery to get into the parks. And, you know, what if you book a 7-night stay at Disney into the parks more than 2 days during that week? So there's all these things that are up in the air, and that's why Disney's not taking any reservations right now. Resort guests are not even guaranteed to get into the park. So they shut down a lot of reservations. They shut down all the dining reservations. They canceled everybody's fast passes. I have no idea when the park reservation system will launch. I assume it has to be before July 11th. It wouldn't honestly surprise me if it was like July 5th. Based on how fast Disney IT department can do anything, it's going to be last minute that this thing opens up because it's a whole new system. I mean, they can't get the systems they have working, and there they have to create one from scratch now.
You know what? Talk about like DVC benefits. Like there's supposed to be a Club 33 DVC annual pass holder preview before they open the parks on July 11th. That's less than a month away. You know what, Jason? Do you first of all, do you have a guess of when you think that might be that they might start those? And secondly, don't you think they should start? I don't know, telling people?
Well, here's the thing. Disney communication is poor, and that's being kind. I have some friends that are Club 33 members. The Club 33 members did not know that they were going to get a preview entry date to the parks until they heard about it from this announcement from Disney. So Club 30, you think Disney communication is poor? Club 33 member communication is worse. And so they have no idea when this preview is going to be. They had no idea it was even going to happen until Disney announced it. They weren't told. I don't know. I think it probably is up in the air at this point because Disney has to call back a lot of furloughed cast members, and they're not getting paid. So how many of them went and found other jobs, maybe at Universal, at SeaWorld, at anywhere? How many of their furloughed cast members went and found other jobs in the interim? On top of that, they're not having any college program or international program cast members. So it's going to be relatively tricky for Disney to be able to run their parks like normal with a much lower amount of cast members. Obviously, we know like they put out a call for cast members who wanted to work in World Showcase at Epcot, because they're not having any of the international program cast members going to be at Epcot when they're open. And so they're recruiting anybody and everybody that wants to work at Epcot. Like, if you want to work at Morocco, normally that's staffed by people, cast members from Morocco. Well, you know, Joe Schmo from Brooklyn could work at Morocco starting on July 15th because they don't have anyone from Morocco right now in Florida. And so I think they're going to have staffing issues. And even though the parks are going to be operating at reduced capacity, that doesn't mean that they need like fewer staff members to run the attractions. Sure, they don't necessarily need like crowd control cast members to run the parades. They don't need crowd control cast members for like fireworks because that's not existing. But there's still a fair number of cast members required to just run the parks. And I think Disney does not know how many they're going to get back. They may hire new, how many they might need to train. And so they have no idea. Like, July 11th is the date that it has to open to the public. But how far ahead of July 11th are they going to have enough staff members stationed in the parks to be able to open for a preview? I don't think they know that. I don't think they know that yet. I think all of this is still as sort of in play in terms of how many cast members they're getting back and when they're coming back and things like that. So, you know, they probably don't know. There's a lot of stuff that they probably don't know. I mean, we've said for weeks now that Disney communication is horrendous. And I'm sure a lot of it is because they don't know. Whether they should know by now or not, I don't know. But whether, you know, they don't make any announcement until they're sure, which means the announcement may come like the day before. I don't know. And if my Club 33 friends get an invitation for a preview, I guess we'll know. But until then, I don't know.
What's that, David?
I honestly don't think they need to. I mean, yes, it would be nice if they told people so they could plan ahead, but for the amount of people I believe they're going to let in for those previews, I don't think they need to publicize it all that much. I think they post it once and they're going to fill up those spots, you know, pretty quickly. So
they probably are, and you know, they probably, especially if DVC members are booking the DVC resorts that are open. You know, I mean, like if you wanted to, you know. If you had DVC points that you wanted to use and you were, you know, a gambling person, you could book the week before July 11th at a DVC resort. And my guess is you'd be among the first to find out because you're going to be there, you're going to be DVC, you're going to already staying on property. So there's probably a good chance that you'd be able to get into those previews. But I don't know. I think,
yeah, it still gets me, though, based on Universal's response and the fact that they don't seem to have they don't have a reservation system, they don't seem to have overcrowding issues. I know it's Universal and it's not Disney, but it seems like with 4 parks versus 2, you know, with bigger capacity in those parks than they have in the Universal parks, that, you know, and that it feels like there should be opportunity for most people that want to get in, because I know there are a lot of people who still either can't get in because of flying in from another country, or they have people who are at high risk in their families, or they just are still afraid to go, or they're waiting for a vaccine. I mean, there's a lot of people like that's going to go. So I'm hoping that Disney is just being overly cautious here with the reservation system, with the no park hopping, with the resort guests aren't guaranteed rooms and all that stuff. I'm hoping that it works pretty smoothly based again on the way Universal's opening happened. But again, it's still shocking to me, especially as we've started the conversation talking about them, all the points for DVC. If they did the previews just for DVC and were able to promote it earlier, I think more people who are fanatics like we are will and burn some points in order to be at that premiere or the preview.
Sure, I agree, and so I think they will announce it as soon as they can. Whether it's in advance enough for people like us to book a trip to get there for the previews. I don't know. And
Yeah.
yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think Disney's being like Universal relatively cautious with their previews and things like that too. I think Disney's being cautious because nobody knows what it's going to turn out to be. It may be that they put this whole reservation system in place and they use it for a week and then they junk it because they don't need it.
Yeah, kind of like they did for Galaxy's Edge. So
yeah,
let me ask
exactly,
you something, Jason,
exactly.
because I know we're kind of running out of time here, but something that came up this week in the news that I wanted to ask you about, because I know you've been a big critic of Disney's bag check policy and procedures, and this new system that they were testing out at Disney Springs for security. Are you excited that that's happening? And B, do you think some of the delay in them opening is them wanting to get these things actually in place at the parks for opening of the parks?
I'm glad they're doing this at Disney Springs. I think it's a step in the right direction. It doesn't necessarily solve the problem of having people look through your bags, because if you're going with anything larger than a small clutch or wallet, you still have to put your bag on a table and let them look at it. So what it does is it bridges the gap between the no bag line and the I only have a small wristlet, I don't want to get in this big bag check line people. Which maybe there's a lot of people in that. I don't know. I mean, I always see people with just like a small wallet or something that try to go in the no bag line and get redirected because it's a bag. It is what it is. So I think it definitely solves that part of the issue. It may be better than the metal detectors too. Like, it certainly is the case that these things may detect more than metal detectors do, which would be good. It also means you don't have to take your phone out of your pocket and put it over your head to walk through the metal detector. So I think it's good. I think it's a step in the right direction. I don't think that it's going to solve all of the problems. It may speed things up to some extent. I still don't know that it's going to be better or faster or more efficient than X-ray machines for bags.
Yeah. And do you think they'll have these
in any case?
I don't usually jump in, but I was the reporter in question who went through the new system yesterday.
Oh, okay.
And I also went through it today at Disney Springs. It is quicker. You can walk through it full speed. They say 60 guests a minute, so basically one person per second, which if you compare that to an X-ray machine, is far quicker, where it's usually more like 5 seconds per person, and you have to set your bag aside if you have it on the table. So it is quicker, and the small bag folks were getting through pretty efficiently. But my whole point with that is this seems to be intended for the theme parks, in which case the ratio of people with large bags is much, much higher than Disney Springs, where maybe 5% of people had a backpack like myself. It's probably the vast majority in a theme park, and it didn't seem to do a whole heck of a lot to help with that if a metal, aluminum water bottle or a camera were enough to get you pulled aside, and where you essentially go through the exact same process as what you do currently with the bag check. So that was just my take on it.
So Kevin, a purse you could get through maybe, but not a backpack?
Yeah, most of the guests with purses, clutches, I would say, now that I'm learning about bag nomenclature as a reporter, I would say things smaller than a tote bag we're generally getting through without issue. So any normal sized purse, maybe even like just the Loungefly mini backpack would be fine. I think it has a lot more to do with the contents and the density, much like the scanners that they use at the airports for the TSA. It's not necessarily the size of what you have, but how much is crammed inside it and the composition of those items. So if you have, dense electronics, anything significantly metal, that's probably going to get you pulled aside. You're just generally not going to have those things in smaller bags.
Gotcha. And you think these are being made for the park? So do you think that they'll be in place? I mean, could they possibly put these in place by July 11?
This one
installed it
showed
in
up
Springs in
at
a matter of
the Lime
days.
Garage, with Mary Lotus. Now the Lime Garage doesn't open until noon, so they may have, could have taken them 16 hours to install, or it could have just been 2 hours. They have what essentially look like iPads as people are going through that have some information on them for, I guess what you would want to call the ratings of people going through. So whatever the technical term would be, but essentially their status as far as green lighting or red lighting them for additional screening. But it doesn't seem like it requires modification of the surrounding area. I equate it to those anti-theft devices at the exits of retail stores, except these are taller. They're 1.5 to 7 feet high, to include people's hats and things like that in case, somebody was trying to smuggle things through in their hat. But the bit of it ran between those two vertical pieces was raised, so any wiring or things like that were not going through the ground. It was slightly raised to allow those. So basically, it just sat on the ground. And of course, you need electrical and the wiring for those other little iPads and screens. But it seemed, clearly you can install one in less than 24 hours. So the idea that you might need, I don't know, maybe 4 to 6 of these for a park because they are much more efficient. I think that's a project that could be done in a matter of a few days.
Yeah, awesome. Any little bit helps, right?
Yeah, like I said, I think these are going to help. I don't think they're going to be the solution to the bag check problem that I've railed on for weeks now. But certainly they're helpful. And if they're more accurate than, metal detectors, neat. The goal is not only to make the process easier and more efficient, but to make it more accurate as well.
Yeah, and in fairness, that when I got pulled aside today, I didn't go through with my backpacker camera. They may still have some tweaking to do and adjusting of tolerances, so it could improve from that first experience. There's certainly a lot to be seen. So they were still testing today. We'll see how long they continue to test at Springs.
Did you see breaking news? Hong Kong Disneyland opening June 18th.
I saw that. Just popped up on my phone. Thanks to WDWNT, the app. Push notification right there. Yep. 4 days. See, they're opening a whole park with 4 days notice. You're expecting more than 4 days notice for a DVC preview? I doubt it.
I know. I'm insane. I don't know what I'm thinking. I'm sorry.
You're asking too much. You think because you bought your points direct from Disney that you deserve more than 4 days of notification. Well, I got news for you.
I feel so bad for feeling so entitled. I apologize to everyone. This is awful.
I want to go to Hong Kong. I would love to go to Hong Kong so bad. It's the best park ever. It's so nice there. So nice. Anyways. All right. Anything else you guys want to talk about? We fulfilled our 2-hour requirement. We can go as long as we want if there's stuff that you guys still want to talk about. I don't see a lot more questions in the chat. Like somebody did say they're gutting Animal Kingdom bag check area. So maybe they're putting these things in, but it's not gonna. I don't think it's going to be as efficient as X-ray machines for people with backpacks. That's basically my feeling on that. Any other thoughts from anyone? Kevin, did we cover everything we said we were going to talk about? I think so.
Yeah, I don't know if you wanted to get any more into reflections or talk on that. We briefly discussed it.
No, it's canceled. That's my prediction. Good riddance.
I agree.
People who haven't been in DVC members for a long time, certainly might forget that there was a DVC resort at Eagle Pines Golf Course that was announced and had concept art distributed to members and everything. And that got canceled, and that's where they built the Golden Oak. So there was a DVC resort planned for there and announced, and they put out marketing info, and then they said, "Oh no, we're canceling that," and they canceled it. I don't remember where that might have been. After that, then they built Bay Lake, I want to say. It's about that time frame. I think they realized that no one was going to stay there because it's on a golf course, and most people don't go to Disney to golf, and the ones that do don't need to stay on a golf course. So again, it's another one of those things where it was probably one of those resorts that unless the points were really cheap, no one was going to stay there. I mean, the only reason Saratoga works is because the points are relatively cheap compared to anything else on Disney property other than Old Key West. Saratoga has almost no redeeming features other than if you love horses or you wanted to see the Pleasure Island fireworks every night for that short period of time that Saratoga was open before they closed Pleasure Island. They actually built a gazebo for you to see the Pleasure Island fireworks every night. And that was the selling point of Saratoga for a couple months. But Saratoga's popular because it's pretty cheap. So if you're running short on points and you own it like Grand Floridian, but you don't have enough points to stay a week at Grand Floridian, you can probably get by at Saratoga, and it's still a pretty nice room. Saratoga's just enormous, and so it has availability quite a lot of the time.
It's always the last one booked.
Just because it's so big. Say that again, David?
Eagle Pines announced in July of 2001 and was supposed to open in 2004. I'd never heard of that one.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
No,
I was just saying Saratoga Springs
is
always the last one that's booked. You can almost always find availability there.
This is true.
The only thing I'll say in reflections is it doesn't make business sense, but part of me kind of wishes they would have went ahead and built it, not sold those points for a couple of years, but let that be the means of getting inventory out of the points or getting points inventory out.
That might not necessarily be allowed. Because they can build it, and if Disney owns the rooms and they're not dedicated into the condominium, I think is the legal parlance for that, it may not be possible for members to book it. So unless the rooms are officially designated as part of the DVC system, members can't book those rooms, and if that's the case, that means they weren't sold because they're not dedicated into the system. Disney could always book them for cash, but that's like the least of their worries at this point is having rooms to book for cash. So maybe there was a way they could do that, but at first thought, I kind of think that maybe wouldn't be allowed.
Plus, it's not like they would take on the capital expense right now for no return for another 4 years. So.
Yeah, no, for sure.
The other thing that bothers me about that is I feel like the parks are overcrowded as it is. And again, not in a pandemic, but the idea of building more hotel rooms, it seems like that just means more people,
need.
Which means, I've felt all along they need a fifth park, and I know you've said that you don't think that's anytime soon or ever. But I just feel like they need to spread people out more.
Yeah,
they sure do. I think my prediction, and I've said this before, my prediction is that in 15 to 20 years, we'll look back and people will say the biggest mistake that Disney made in this time frame is that they didn't build a full Star Wars park and shoehorned it into studios.
Yeah,
because a full Star Wars park would be an enormous demand. They could have built the hotel right into the park, like Miracosta at Tokyo Disney Sea. In a whole park that would have drawn people as opposed to squishing them into an already existing park. They wouldn't have had to remove rides from studios. And yeah, the number of hotel rooms that they've added to Disney property in the last 20 years so far outpaces the increase in capacity of the existing parks, none of which have opened since 2000, obviously. I mean, certainly they've increased capacity by things like New Fantasyland with a couple new attractions that increases capacity. But those attractions do not increase capacity anywhere near enough to account for the enormous number of hotel rooms they've added to the resort since 2000. And so, yeah, a fifth park is absolutely needed. So something is needed to mitigate crowds. And especially after a pandemic, when crowds are going to be limited to 25 or 50% of capacity or whatever it is, there's way too many hotel rooms on property for the capacity of the parks that exist. And I mean, that's why, DVC members come and then they stay and then they go to Universal because Disney parks are too crowded. So that my prediction is that we're going to look back in hindsight and say, wow, what a stupid mistake it was to not build a Star Wars park and accompanying Star Wars hotel is in the park. But yeah, they need something because crowds are way too bad. And it's right now their solution to the crowds is increasing prices. Which works. I mean, certainly increasing prices affects the supply and demand curve, usually by decreasing demand. But at some point, too many people get priced out of the market. People who, grew up like me where going to Disney for a week, maybe not every year, but every couple of years is like a rite of passage for childhood. That's not the case for many, many families anymore. It's just too expensive. And so at some point, Disney has built a brand around family entertainment that's stronger than any other brand because it's so well known by so many people. If kids stop going and, don't watch Disney Plus, there's no brand association for them anymore. They don't have any connection to the parks like we do because they've never gone. So if the more people they price out of the market, the more they hurt the brand long term. They're not going to see it for 20 to 30 years. When those people have kids and say, I'm not taking my kids to Disney because my parents never took me to Disney. We don't need to go. So it may not come back to bite them for 20 or 30 years, but it absolutely will hurt things long term. But again, Disney, for the past 20 years, has been making decisions repeatedly that seem to increase the bottom line in the immediate term, but hurt the brand in the long term. They've been doing it repeatedly since like 2000, 2001. Certainly since Iger took over for sure, but even maybe start. And so, at some point they're gonna realize. At some point they're gonna realize that people, it's the brand is not worth what it once was. And that's for a variety of reasons, but it's all decisions that Disney has made, and usually it was decisions to make a quick buck. So that's my prediction too. Any other commentary?
No, I think we should definitely end on a downer. That's great. Let's do that.
No, here's the bright point. I will end on an absolutely exciting moment. I'm going to Disney World in 2 days. Actually, I'm not going to Disney World in 2 days. I'm going to Orlando in 2 days, I will be going to Disney. I'll go to Disney Springs. But as I said at the beginning, Tom and I are checking into the Polynesian on June 22nd, a week from tomorrow. So we'll have full coverage of the DVC resort's reopening. But yeah, I'll be in Orlando Tuesday and hitting up Universal and hopefully getting to Volcano Bay before the crowd. Like, crowds were pretty much pretty full over the weekend, but hopefully things go back to the very low crowds during the week, and I can snag some quality time at Universal and especially Volcano Bay because they've never been there. I'm really looking forward to that. But Tom says it's the best water park ever when there's no crowds, and it's the worst when it's crowded. So I'm hoping for the former, not the latter. But anyway, that's the exciting point. So next week's episode of Pressing Issues will probably be done with me in the studio at WWNT Studios. Maybe we'll have Tom on. I don't know. People in the chat can say whether they want me to have Tom on again or not. There's always mixed reviews when he's on the show. But yeah, next. So I will be on News Tonight this week in the studio, and Pressing Issues will be at least me live in the studio next Sunday. And then we'll have plenty of content for you Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday from the Polynesian and from Bay Lake Tower as the DVC resorts reopen to the public. So there you go. Exciting. Well, I'm excited. I don't know about you, but
a special Father's Day edition live from Orlando.
There you go. There you go.
Unless one of those previews
everybody
gets
wants
scheduled
to
for
know
next Sunday at 8 p.m.
Hey, wouldn't that?
Jason-
No, there's no way they're going to be that early.
No.
Yeah, I still think it's going to be after the 4th.
Yet. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
it's
think the
gonna be
5th
after
through the 8th are probably the most likely dates.
Something along those lines. Yep.
Yeah.
But we'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see what we hear. Stay tuned for more news every day on WDW News Today. Download the app so you get push notifications. Check out the website every day. Check out our new site, Universal Parks News Today, which just opened last week at the same time as the parks reopened. All of our Universal coverage is on Universal Parks News Today. So check that out. I'll be live blogging from Universal next week when I'm there. Probably not though. Reporter jobs are that's not in my job description. But certainly I'll take pictures and tweet. How about that? But yeah, so I'd like to thank our panel tonight, David and Marcy, who seems to have disappeared, and Rob. Thanks for coming on. I think this was a great discussion about DVC. And I hope everybody enjoyed it, even though I think we might have made some of your head spin. Oh, yeah, somebody that said Hilton Head and Vero Beach open tomorrow. So there you go. But I don't have a reservation at Vero Beach, so too bad.
Still not going there.
Still ain't making it to Vero Beach. I might not make it there before my DVC contract expires. As much as I'd like to. I love the beach. My wife doesn't like the beach, but I love the beach. Anyway, yes, thanks to our panel. Thanks to Kevin for running the whole show. I know we started a couple minutes late because of some technical difficulties. We're actually running on an entire backup system right now. But thanks to Kevin for getting things quickly operational on our backup system that no one noticed. So thank you, Kevin. Thanks for hopping in to talk to us about the scanners, because that was pretty big news. And yeah, so tune in next week for another episode of Pressing Issues. I don't know what we'll talk about next week. We talk about Volcano Bay the whole time because I'll be excited.
Disneyland.
But yeah, maybe Disneyland. I don't know. Maybe I'll go to SeaWorld. I don't know. Who knows? But anyway, tune in next week. Thanks for watching tonight, everybody. Stay tuned at WWNT.com all week for your Disney news as it happens. And, yeah. Thanks for watching. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Be safe.